Welcome back, everyone. Today, our guest is someone very special, and I'm super excited to speak with Mike today. And we have an amazing episode for you. John, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, we have Mike, the CEO and co-founder of FreeFuse. Mike and I go way back. We've known each other for quite a few years now as the team was building this product out. He has an insane amount and very deep wealth of knowledge for any of those folks out there who are starting to build or wanting to build or builder curious. He's endless insights. So I think we're going to get some really awesome stuff out of him today.
Yeah. Well, I want to say how much I appreciate y'all for having me on here. I just hope that I can provide anything useful for people at any part of their journey. And especially, for those starting out, because I think that there's a lot of, stuff that people, kind of gain insights from, and you turn that into something that, could be valuable to you. You adapt your own model to it, and then you can run with it. And so, as long as I can go and provide some value to some other folks in the space, all the power, and I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Awesome. So, to start off, I have a question for you, Mike. I want to understand what inspired you to start building? What about your background or what motivated you to be in the industry that you currently are in? And how did your background shape the way that you approach building companies?
So, funny enough, I look at like very early parts of my life as kind of the backdrop of like what really got me into all of this, right? And one of the things that I have always been able to do, and people tell me this now, is that I'm able to kind of see things before they exist and see how they can be all connected. And then I have a really good capability to developing out what would be a win-win scenario for everybody, right? And that actually happened as I grew as a founder and grew as a person, because early days you don't really think about that, right? You're really just thinking about the idea, the product, and you're really thinking about how do you get this out to as many people. One of the things that always really stuck with me was the idea of building, just period, right? I've been building, when I was younger, I built tons of Lego sets. I built tons of different models and kits and things like that. But something that really got my mind working was like I would actually be able to take like Lego sets from a number of different models and builds, and I would build entirely new things out of them, like things that weren't actually directions. And I could use that creativity to kind of create an entire sort of array of things that didn't even exist, or things that I would hope to exist, or like things that would be kind of cool. And that was from a number of different shows that I used to watch. Like, there was a long period of time where I really appreciated, for example, the stuff that was on Toonami. And specifically, there was a show that, during its runtime, everybody always talks about like, this show that was featuring mechs called, Gundam, right? And so the actual, the period of time from when they had Toonami on, from I think it was the 5 or 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific time, or like 5 to 7 Pacific, p.m. Pacific time. I would go home, watch that, and I get a lot of ideas about what I wanted to do with it. And looking back at it even beforehand, it's actually a pretty mature show for, a younger audience, because they really do
Mhm.
talk about things, sophisticated geopolitical conflict. And in this case, they were talking about interplanetary conflict, colonies that would be existing as satellites across different parts of the galaxy, right? And so, in that same vein, I really liked things like Star Wars, right? And being able to build that. And so my approach to how I work now is still that same approach. It has the same idea around building. It has the same idea around how do you actually figure out how to, align with people? How do you figure out who are the people that you want to work with, and, what their capabilities are, and who are the people that you don't? Like, what are the things that are diametrically opposed, and not just because of like, them being a competitive product, but like you'll find that you don't want to really work with people because of their values and beliefs, because they just don't mesh with like what you want to do, right? And I think it's very important to be very clear about who you want to be as a person before you go on a journey like this, because you'll be very much tested along the entirety of your career about who you are, right? And so, for me, I always like to kind of keep things simple with myself, right? For the longest time, I've always said with me, it's what you see is what you get. There's nothing else that exists out here with myself. And I will usually be the type of person who's going to express who they are very quickly, right? And so I think there's a lot of value in that specifically for me, but it might not be the same value that someone wants to have, because that's just not their personality type, right? And so All the experiences of wanting to be a builder, wanting to grow as a person, have led to a number of different self-development initiatives, a number of different things that I've personally looked to, like the philosophies around being a giving person, because it wasn't just useful, but it's, someone who I wanted to be, right? And it was really about that and that philosophy that even opened up a number of doors, right? And so all of that has culminated into the person that I am today. And I'm very grateful to have had the right, types of advisors and people who believed in what we were building, but people who also had the same types of values and beliefs themselves, and, really meshed with who I am as a person. And so I've consistently kept that as my North Star of who I want to work with and how I want to operate.
Yeah, I love that. I think something that, at least when the founders I've talked to over the years, there's this underlying foundational core, whether it's belief or system of operating, that your creativity has never been snuffed out, right? It's there, it's constantly there. It's that itch you can't scratch enough, right? And that's what I have found folks who have built really great products, or just products in general, or their own businesses, are looking to solve a problem. They're needing that, and that creative aspect has always been this core flourishing thing in them. And you speak to this too, as well as resilience. The ability to look to speed bumps as a learning opportunity, or going out and finding those co-founders that you might build something with, or just constantly be iterating on a product and find that new thing that, or that new avenue that might lead you to success, or at least that next milestone. And just generally speaking, having that core ethos to both who you are and who you want that shared experience to be with, and what you want that company to entail. And so I guess, from that, I'm really curious just to hear how that now translated into your story post that, right? So what's the story of FreeFuse, and how did it come about, and the folks that you've worked with and built this really awesome product with?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I used to spend a lot of time in the beginning of the story, right? And I can tell you, it started off when I was a teaching assistant. I saw some needs in terms of what it is that students were coming out with respect to the pandemic period of time. And, like, seeing that the type of format that I wanted to put into the screen of space was going to be useful for them, because, it made it searchable and digestible for very hard and difficult to understand topics. And then using AI so that the professors and, some of the teaching assistants whose side that I was on at this point, but understanding it from the student side as well, like, well, this was going to be useful, because if you can automate a lot of the work that people don't find to be interesting, you can allow them to have much more creativity, right? You can allow them to have much more attention and detail into the things that matter, right? And I could talk about that story and the initial pilot program with the 200 students and getting, like, 30,000 interactions on, FreeFuse, which, for those who aren't aware, really at that time, it was really just these choose your own adventure media, sort of platform, right? The capability to make decisions and, have these, served up experiences that would be influenced by your choices. And I used to spend a lot of time in that part of the story, right? And I think that it's good to, in your earlier days, to tell that part of the story, because a good origin story, and even just reading this from other places, a good origin story is what has launched religions. It's launched entire movements, right? And I think a very powerful origin story is what gets you through those hard days, right? Like, if somebody tells you that they were working on something that was an app, that was because one of their parents was sick and they were able to use this and they were able to get better, or God forbid it was after, a moment where they passed, like, that's a phenomenal story. And everyone should feel good about that. And they should feel good about that, that they are going out there and making a difference in that in specific pain and in that specific area. Right. But what I found in this story is that the story, just like any type of journey that you go on, has taken the sort of twists and turns of really evolving who we are. And I think that the part of the story that a lot of folks, I think, would get more value from are the challenging parts of the story, which, if you don't hit some of your metrics and growth that you wanted to, right? Like, or if you felt like, oh, hey, like there were places that I thought were home run opportunities that we'd really start to go and really scale and just like do all this, and then those were gone for whatever reason. Those are usually those 10 pole moments that you have a decision to make, right? You have a decision
Totally.
about who you want to be as a person in this situation. You have a decision about how you want to operate as an organization within that period of time. And so I think the better story is actually around what, of course, we continued scaling and building up the company from that initial pilot program. We found that corporate training was an easier opportunity for us because education, for whatever reason, didn't want to utilize this, even though we had all the backing of even the students and wanted this in all of their classes, right? Excellent data, but yet the school wouldn't uptake it, or they weren't willing to even take a chance on it in some monetary value, right? And kind of fought them on that for a while, which, funny enough, I'm actually on good terms with a lot of those people now these days. But like, in the early times, kind of have that chip on your shoulder about it, right?
Yeah.
But it was through that the evolution of what we did, we had to figure out, okay, so what really is this, right? We originally thought it was this, but educating people, what is that broadly, right? And so when I thought about that process in a more broad sense, education in and of itself obviously also means training. I need to go train my staff if I'm going to go do something. So that was an easy analog, right? But there's also the idea of, well, when someone goes and purchases a product from you, they need to know what to do. You can't tell people to go to IKEA and not give them a set of instructions to go set up their stuff, right? That'd be ludicrous, right? And so no one would buy your product. And so from that perspective, we said, okay, well, you have to educate your customers, right? And so it was really easy to go and analog to customer success. And of course, in that same way, certain industries obviously lean heavily towards educating their prospects. Those are things like medical education. Medical education budgets are actually sometimes owned by marketing. Why would that be? Right? Because they need to go and educate people before they're going to buy $1 million instrument. So we then decided, well, you know what? This is in the same vein of the type of person that we would want to talk to as well. They seem to have a lot of the same challenges. They are going to have these certain elements of a team that are going to be really liking our product. Let's go talk to them, right? And basically, what I've outlined it to you was the story that went all the way up until 2024, right? These were all the places that we explored. These were all the arenas that we started to play in. And it was a natural progression of increasing use case, more and more people seeing the value. And then in 2024, which I think for a lot of folks was like a, pretty difficult time, right? There was a point where there was folks that we were starting to, or we had been sort of cooking up some of those deals, and what was crazy was like a lot of those people who we ended up like trying to work with, whether we were trying to talk to them for in the last like 3 months from that time, or within like maybe they were ready the next year or something like that. What we found was that a lot of those people, in some of those cases, they were getting let go from their companies because it was an actual economic problem across the board. And so what we found was, we were still growing and doing things fine, but it just wasn't where I wanted it to be, right? It wasn't where I felt like we had a really heavy growth trajectory. If I was looking at our numbers, and if those deals were still in place, I would have had a way better year than we even could have fathomed, right? But that's why really want to focus on that part of the story, because I feel like that part is really what's actually the most useful, right? Because I think a lot of people will run into this problem earlier than we did, right? Which is,
hmm
you come to a point where you say, well, you know what, my tool was only useful to X amount of people, or hey, my organization like really could only be set up this way. It is a problem, right? It becomes like a very distinct problem. And so that was how we needed to evolve from thinking about ourselves as a standalone piece that maybe here and there we're going to work together with a few organizations, and instead becoming an integral part, and putting together a bunch of pieces that would become integral parts to a number of different organizations and industries, right? And it was that philosophy that led me into the consistent building, with intention, of our ecosystem and our partners around the ecosystem, and why I've leaned so heavily into it. And I can tell you right now, I think I think the actual like outcome of this, which I thought, I'm conservatively sort of saying will be a doubling of our revenue this year. I think I can 10x it. So that's really what I'm excited about, because for me, and going back to like the start of this whole conversation, for me, it's never been about the accolades, and it's never been about like, cool, I have all this, I have all this success. I just love the game. And for me, that's the part that excites me the most, right? I actually like to know that I'm building a structure and an organization, and I'm building things that really matter. But I also like to know that I'm really, really good at it. And I like to know that I can, reach those levels of being the best that I possibly can be. And I like to model my game against not just the people who are, successful people in the fields of tech and business. I like to model my game against people, your, Kobe Bryant's, right? The people, your sports people as well, right? Because the work ethic and the sheer determination and competitiveness, I have those with respect to this. I'm willing to spend time like Kobe would talk about waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning and getting up shots and having that as part of that regimen. And for me, I'm willing to do whatever things it takes for us to improve, whether that's me spending the time and putting my efforts into understanding a new framework that I can add to some of our AI systems, or can I figure out what would be the best next set of industries or best next set of use cases? Do I need to do the research around that? Do I need to grow myself as a person and then give all of those insights to our team in a scalable way? So for me, like my improvement of myself is incredibly important. And I model that game against a lot of the great athletes because I want to kind of have that sort of, I think they talked about this with Kobe, a maniacal sense of like trying to get better all the time. And like,
The Mamba mentality, for those
yeah,
who aren't familiar.
right, right. And while I don't like to prescribe to anybody else's mentality, I like to say that like I want to spend every day knowing that I actually was able to get just that much better every time, right? Am I able to get like 10% better? Am I able to get 50% better, right? And so I want to be able to really put that in play, and I want to be able to do that on a consistent basis, every single day. And we're not talking about, taking some, weekends off, especially in the early days. For now, it's been every single day. How can I get better? Right. And everybody has their own philosophy around how much do you need to rest, and everybody's different. So I'm not going to tell anybody that they need to work 7 days a week at all, but it's because I love it so much.
From a start perspective, do you feel that, I mean, I just mentioned the Mamba mentality, right? I actually have, funny enough, I have that as my background on my computer. So it's this, I think it's one of these core foundational aspects of a founder or builder has to be kind of this competitive mindset. Are there any other, what would you say the formula is for, those pieces of what make up a founder starting out or who might currently be in the trenches right now?
I would say this. I don't think it's a formula that I can tell, like I can say this is the definitive formula. I think everybody has a formula to succeed though. And I can tell you the tenets of finding that. Because to me, I think that finding your formula to succeed is more important than me telling you what the formula of a good founder is, right? Because anybody could say, this is an ingenuitive person. They're creative. They can, think in these ways. Like they might, some people might throw out some esoteric, random stuff like, hey, they prescribe to like the Andrew Huberman model, or oh, hey, they like Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and they like take showers. Like it's like silly stuff, right? Like to me, I feel like one of the things that I would say to find your formula, you need to understand how many skills do you actually have that you feel you are going to be better than anybody you're going to be able to bring in, right? And what you'll find is that there's not a lot, right? Now, you
Yeah,
want
that's a good
right,
point.
right. And so what you want to do is you want to know how many of those things that you own that you feel like you're good at, and what of those gives you the energy to wake up every day and just be excited to do your thing. Right. And you should also understand, is this thing going to be the thing? Are those things that you uniquely do? Are they going to be the things that at 2 or 3 in the morning, when you are dead tired and you know you have to wake up again at 7 in the morning, are you going to be energized to continue moving on because you have something that you need to get done? Maybe it's not at that 7 a.m. meeting. I would encourage people to obviously have a little bit more foresight there. But maybe you do have some stuff you need to get done. You need to get turned in, a proposal, a partnership deal. You need to understand of those things, what of those things gives you the zest and the energy to really go at it every single day. And it's not like you go at it one day, 2 days, and you're like, wow, that's the thing. Talk to me when you've gone through 100 days. Talk to me when you've gone to 365 days. That's when you really know, right? Now, in that same vein, what are the things that you're really good at that you don't like, right? Now, you can do some of those for a bit, but they will zap your energy. How quickly can you feasibly get somebody to do that? And there's even things that you want to understand you love doing, but you don't do them very well, but you still like doing them. What is that? And so when you actually kind of figure out who you are, and it's really, being honest with yourself. I'm not very good at Figma, although I figured out a way to get better at it, but I'm not very good at it. I'm going to go hire somebody to go do all that stuff because they're going to have the eye to doing that. And I'm going to give them the step-by-step guidance that I've built out through some of my AI tools, right? But at the end of the day, whatever output that is, I'm going to trust that that person's going to have a better eye to shape it and make it better than I will, right? Because that's silly for me to do. Now, when you have all of that, and you figure out what of those skills and what of those things that gives you joy and the stuff that's not so much, and et cetera, et cetera. Now you need to figure out what of those things are actually going to contribute to the success of your organization. Because then when you do that, you can now then go and say, okay, well, if I'm going to build software, clearly need a dev, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean you need a developer who's going to be your co-founder right from the jump. You might be able to actually have enough resources to make a silly little MVP that's at least enough to validate your thought process, right? And by silly, I mean people should be totally okay with shipping something that's not completely the version that they want, but they should be totally okay with shipping something that tells people that the final outcome is actually going to be of value. And whether you're a tool that's going to have people pay for it or you're going to have people advertise on it, you need to understand what is actually going to be that thing that can prove out that you actually have a model that can either be monetized in some way or at least something that people are going to have high usage for, right? In which case you could obviously then, surmise to say that people are going to advertise on it. So once you figure all that stuff out, a team building becomes a lot simpler in a sense, right? Because now you know what you're willing to do. Now you know the areas that you're deficient at or don't even have any but resources in. And once you figure that out, you can maximize your capabilities in those areas that you actually want to maximize in. And that's when you can start thinking about how am I conducting my, my everyday? How am I conducting my business? What are the things that I have in place that are my systems, right? For me, I like to do a Sunday planning system. I get my entire week mapped out and I only adhere it to three different things, right? I only have three categories of things that I will schedule anytime on, right? I have nothing else. And it's that simplicity that allows me to reduce the complexity of a life that I lead. If I put everything in the three buckets of my major things, right? I have certain goals in, business. I have certain goals in terms of organizational development, and then I have certain personal goals. And if those three major areas of emphasis are not, something that somebody's looking to get my time on, then it's not that I would never schedule it, but I'm going to schedule it in lower priority than anything else that I'm doing that week. Maybe that gets punted to the following week or the week after. But like if that doesn't fall into those categories, then I'm not going to prioritize it like I will everything else. And I think that having systems like that are really more along the lines of the type of person you are. Hence why I don't really prescribe to saying a great founder has this, this, and this. I think a great founder knows who they are and can build the systems around themselves to be great.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I think maybe you're thinking about this too, but I think that spins really easily into, well, then how do you find those people, whether it's your co-founders, maybe more specifically finding your co-founders for maybe our audience, for those gaps of skills that you need to actually succeed with a business, in particular in the SaaS space or in the startup world. How did you go about kind of going out and finding those people after you had already kind of acknowledged those gaps or those voids that you need to fill?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that I would prescribe to as a system for myself, not everybody has to prescribe to it, right? One of the things that I really found that I was already doing, but I was able to find it codified in some kind of framework was the idea of being giving, right? And I was already, really turning, the corner in terms of not that I was sort of a taking person. And I'm using the framework from Adam Grant's Give and Take, right? Because they have the people who are givers, they have the people who are takers, and they have the people who are matchers, right? And of course, a lot of people fall into the matcher category. It's kind of like the you scratch my back, I scratch yours, right? And it's very common in business. What am I going to get out of it versus what you're going to get out of it, right? And I would say that before I even built anything ever, right? Because I started to follow this sort of methodology, or not even methodology, but kind of mental framework right around the time where I was starting to think about ideas. So before that, when this is probably maybe just sort of being younger, I guess, but coming out of undergrad, going into grad school, I kind of had this mentality of, well, I guess like what's in it for me? Why would I do that? Right. But what I found was there were some folks even that I had in that experience who I was like, hey, you're doing something for me. I've got to do something for you. I feel like I have to. And that's kind of typical matching behavior. And they were like, no, it's totally cool. I am about giving to folks because, and whether people say it in the, everything comes back around kind of like, sort of woo woo thing, or whether people look at it from the perspective of, no, I just give for the sake of giving and it's not a big deal. Right. And I was always so curious about that, and it really stuck in my mind. It was a guy named Thomas, and he was in our program. I got to meet him. He's from South Africa, very good guy. And I've been looking to get back in touch with them actually. But Great dude. He was there for about 3, 4 years or 5 years, I think, getting his PhD, and I got a chance to talk with him, had a couple drinks with him a few times, and he was always just he was that was just his mentality, right? That was just who he was, and wasn't like he learned that from somebody. It was just the type of person that he wanted to be, right? And that was really powerful to me because if you look at maybe some of that particular industry of like, research and doing all of that, you have a lot of people who are it's kind of cutthroat to some degree, right? There's people who are trying to publish papers. There's people who are trying to get their name stamped somewhere so that they can put another Google Scholar link on their resume, right? And so those are the things that give them the tenure to be a professor or give them the industry job or a lot of that, right? So I didn't want to adhere to that any longer, right? Not to say that I really cared about being in industry. I really just wanted to use that as a stepping stone to eventually starting a company, right? But all of the stuff that I was in with my PhD in the material science engineering stuff, that was all stuff that had a 10-year horizon. Even some of the stuff I was doing in there with especially medical alloys, like I was like, okay, well that's never going to have uh, something where I'm going to have a time period where I can just build and just figure that out. I would need to have millions of dollars to even just go and even start what it is that I'm trying to start. Right now, obviously I've still put a pin in that because no one's doing it yet. And I might explore that later. But at the end of the day, that idea of being a giving person and prescribing to that, that's what actually allowed me to have the mentality to say, well, hey, when I'm really gonna take a page out of the book of this framework. So give and take talks about, the givers, the people who are, willing to give their time, willing to give their insights, and they don't expect anything in return, right? And what they found was those people were way more successful anyway, right? Because they got into more people's, opportunities because the matchers would always match them. Giving people would always help giving people. And even if you found a taker, right, like those people every once in a while would actually give back too. So it was a net positive to some degree across the board, right? So, once I found that, I really dove deep into like, how am I doing this and doing it intentionally? Now, bringing that back into the question that you had, that mentality was also why I would take a lot. I felt very comfortable taking a lot of time to explore, okay, well, what are some of the places that I can meet people just like myself, right? Even in the early days of just trying to figure out what idea we're going to do, I wanted to go to as many of those events as possible. I wanted to find as many people as possible. I wanted to find any opportunity, even if I was just going to go to a networking event of 12 people. I just wanted to be around people who were like building things they really, really cared about. And so I went far and wide with that as much as I possibly could, right? Like that included things like joining Lunch Club, that included things like, building relationships with the Entrepreneur Center, the McFerrin Center at Texas A&M. I wanted to know why people were building these things. Like the questions that you're asking me, I was asking questions to those people myself. I wanted to understand. And so what I would recommend is even before you start building, there's a lot of people who already do this, but you should just try to find as many opportunities to get exposure to other people and how they did things, because you can ask a lot of these same questions and of course, find some of those people who are like you. And best, yeah, you will actually be able to talk with them and see, do your values and beliefs, do they fit into who I am? You could both love a product and a service that you both want to bring to the world with another person. But what you'll find is they maybe have a timeline of, I want to have an exit in 5 years. That would be really problematic if it was working with someone like me, where I don't really have a desire for that, right? I love the game, right? And so for me, it's not about, some people's game also is, I'm going to go build a company, I'm going to sell it, and then I'm going to go do the next thing. That's their game. So you want to use those to actually find the people who mesh with you values and beliefs wise and timeline wise and everything, right? Because what I found is a lot of people who had their partnerships dissolve or unfortunately companies fold is that the founders all start hating each other. And it's because they weren't very clear about the social contract of what they were doing from the get-go. And so you find people who all have the same aim. You need to find people who all have the same desire and the same amount of energy to put into this as possible, right? It may not make sense for you to go and partner up with somebody who just has a kid, for example, because your timelines of somebody who is a single person might be very different from someone who has a family. You might be expecting somebody to work to 2, 3, 4 in the morning because you're doing it. And they might be thinking, oh, I need to go and have a rest because I have a kid. They're 1 year old. I have to take care of them. Right. And so a lot of that needs to be mapped out from the get-go. What does that happen, or what happens when that happens? How do you consolidate that? How do you figure out, like, what issues or things that are, non-starters? What are things that you would never even begin to even, think about? Are these some of these people going to be the same types of people that you're excited to be around all the time? And if not, then it's not worth partnering with those folks. So I would just go to all of those events. I would be able to go. I would say, try to find as many people you can talk to in spaces, from a LinkedIn group to Reddit to, like, Discord. Like, go to any of those things. Find who your vibe is, and then, like, see if you have an opportunity to talk with them one on one, see what their aims are. And if you're going to go make a deal with anybody in regards to, like, building something together, you need to, at some point, you don't need to do it all the time or even live near each other, but you do need to, at some point, like, meet up with that person in person, get a sense of, like, who they are and the energy that they give, and then you can really, like, decide if you want to move forward with working together with them.
So I'm wondering, Mike, you mentioned you love playing the game, and I'm sensing a very much an athlete mentality towards building in general, and also being a part of a team, and finding co-founders who share the same vision, but also the same goals as you. Have you had a time when you noticed, how do you know when to stop playing the game? Or how do you know when you have to pivot what you're doing right now? Because it's not working or the market's reacting differently. When should a founder know that? Like, what's the balance there?
That's a great question, right? And I think that there's a lot of different philosophies with it. There's the people who were so close to gold, and then you changed it up, and now you're here, right? And I think that that's what, philosophically, I think it's important to actually do your. You need to figure out your distribution at the same time as you figure out your actual product development. Because if you don't figure that out, you could have the greatest thing in the world, right? But one of the best things in the world and really bad distribution will always lose to decently mediocre and great distribution, right? Because they just get it in front of so many more eyes. There's a ton of products that fit in that category, right? There's people who use things that are vastly inferior, right? Now, for example, people will use things that are vastly inferior when they're all packaged together, which is a fun insight that I also use to my advantage, like, later on down the road. But, like, people will actually not really think about it. Like, they'll get the entire purchase of the entire thing because you bundled it all together. The question that I would probably ask somebody like that is, one, have you figured out distribution? Because you might find that your pivot was because you didn't think that anyone you were talking to had value. And obviously that's a customer development, customer discovery problem, right? Whereas a lot of founders think that nobody likes their stuff because they're kind of stupid and just will throw ad money to it all day. Like, that's dumb. You need to figure out different ways to do it, right? And it's because a lot of people don't want to do the work to actually understanding where people are getting all their information from. They just don't. And, with respect to, like, the question about, how this is a part of the game, pivots are a part of the game, right? Like, it's just like any adjustment and strategy that, you will actually use. When someone throws out a strategy to try and beat you, you need to adapt to said strategy. And then you need to do so in a relatively quick manner. Some organizations are obviously going to be a little bit more heavyweight. So changing up how your entire database schema is done is going to be insane versus, oh, I'm going to change a few features, like I'm going to turn all the buttons purple. Like, stuff like that can even increase your conversion rate. Silly stuff like that, and fonts. Like, so I would always say that I think it's an experimentation mindset, but I would like to also have somebody, define to me, why do you think you, like, rather than saying I need to pivot, period. I've seen people who do the weirdest stuff with, like, consistently pivoting, right? Every time that they feel they hit a snag, they kind of try to change up what they're doing. And I'm like, well, what basis do you have? And a lot of the times I hear, well, it's just getting the adoption I want. Okay, what does that mean? Like, what adoption are you trying to get? Oh, well, I mean, I was hoping to get at least 10% of this grouping of people over here. And I was like, okay, were they? Have you even defined your ideal user profile or ideal client profile? Like, and a lot of the times that question is no. It's okay. So you were just expecting a whole bunch of people who are literally completely different at to various levels and degrees, right?
All right. Okay. So accelerators. This is what we want to know about Mike. What was your accelerator experience like?
Um, I think that accelerators first are like anytime that you've applied to college, the letters. So the type of, like, the type of experience it is just like applying for college, right? You go and do an application process, you go and do an interview process, and you should find the ones that you feel like are going to do one of two things. They're either going to be like a part of a venture firm where you're obviously the end of that will lead to them obviously being a lead investor of investing, in your company, or they're a program that's obviously well known and has, the prestige to bring in good investors, right? And you're not going to know which ones to go to. Like you can obviously go, you can obviously apply to your YCs. We went through Alchemist, which made sense because we were doing B2B and SaaS. And now, some programs are going to be 3 months, and their entire thing is about helping you do the company building and the pitch. Some programs are going to be, 10 weeks, company building and pitch, right? Some programs are going to be hours, which was like 6, 7 months, and you have some part of it be like the actual customer side, and then what the parts of that are going to be the actual side along, doing the pitch, right? And so, I think you need to find what it is that your needs are. You should find the programs that are going to give you the support. And in the case of Alchemist, they gave us the vault, which has everybody's contacts like after the fact for as long as we want. So I think like having the support and the resources is important, and then having the right people who are going to be advising your company and your, everything else, like super important. Right. And so I would just say that is the best in terms of good fit. But funny enough, I've had like I've applied to a program where like it was like a VC firm's like, investment, and like didn't get into that just for like giggles. I might as well just see if they'd be willing to talk to me as a venture firm, right? And they still talked to me and said no. And it's okay, well, never mind then. That's just never been a good fit. So, it's stuff like that that just kind of makes me laugh as well, because now, funny enough, I have a lot of people who are hitting me up now because it's like, well, now I have this sort of open range of what I've been doing by building up, ecosystems and partnerships and things like that, where, like I said, the growth potential in some of these is already showing it's going to be enormous, right? And funny enough, I probably will have a bunch of those same people who turned us down, or maybe even just some percentage of that, come back around and say, "Oh, hey, it looks like you're doing really well. Would love to chat," right? And that's the thing, right? Anybody who says no to you right now, you have the opportunity to take that and use that as a chip on your shoulder, and if that fuels you, do it. Right. But like if it makes you stressed and makes you sad, don't do it. Like, go find the people who like really understand and love what you do, just like any partner. Oh yeah, sorry. And in terms of strategy, like I would just try and also make one sheet with like all of the information around what people are asking you about, because everybody's generally asking the same thing, just like college applications. So whatever you did to get into college, if you got into college, go do that, and then make it a little bit more on the business side and talking about how transformational and lovely your products are.
Right.
I'd imagine fundraising is equally as hard, right? So, what does that look like? Is it a one size fits all? You going through Alchemist, there's a potential that you might have had a demo day. Do you have any recommendations for, either path and pitching your company for the first time? And just generally speaking, the hit rate is obviously low. So
Yeah.
the going back to kind of your early in this conversation, having that resilience and, fear, because there's probably someone out there for you. You just kind of have to create some of that luck too. So I'm curious what your quick recommendations would be on folks who are looking to fundraise as well now in either direction.
What's hilarious is like, one is in the time in which we were actually going and raising is one of the worst times ever, because it's after 2021 when the valuations are super frothy, right? And so now we have buyer's remorse happening in the year after, and it was a nightmare to try and raise funds. We got some angel checks and things like that, and obviously we're able to work with Alchemist, and it was just such a nightmare, right? And I would also say that if you feel like it's taking up a lot of your time and you're not getting results, like go and try and find some alternative forms of funding, right? But if you need, like, this is my thing. Do not use the validation of them putting money into you as a reason you go out there and get it. Because like a lot of people do. It's oh, it means my idea is good. No one cares about your idea. Like no one cares about that. Like and here's the thing, right? At the end of the day, you still have to prove it. And so for me, for what, I was really upset about it at the time and was very annoyed, especially because we had actually made good numbers in terms of growth, that I thought it was going to be kind of a no-brainer in comparison to some of the other, folks that I saw were actually raising funds, right? And that will happen, right? You're going to get annoyed about stuff like that, especially if you feel like you have a better shot. And more importantly, there was talk about investing in the founders, right? And so, maybe they saw certain things that didn't make the right founding team or things like that. But I'm going to suffice to say that between now, from when I got a bunch of those no's, and now, I think that I would have more of the leverage in terms of what kind of conversation we would even have. Right. And so I'd like to encourage people to not take what these people tell you exactly in the exact way that they tell you, because a lot of the times they won't tell you the truth anyway. So what you need to do is obviously just know what it is that you do, know what it is, the value you created, and prove it. Right. If you need funding, then try and find alternative ways to do it. There are also ways to find, folks who are angels. The tools like Signal will obviously help you find more of the VCs, signal.nfx.com. But you're also going to find stuff like Founder Suite. Founder Suite can help you find some of those angels, right? And you can obviously go to some of these other pitch competitions. There's obviously going to be that push to like go and raise funding for demo day, and you absolutely should follow the formula and obviously do the exercise of doing that. And I've talked, I during that time probably talked to like 80 to 100 of them, right? And it was just, it was a really bad time, right? And of course, there's people who are way better than me at fundraising. That's what they do. They're really good at that, right? And I've gotten better at it as time has gone on, and obviously we've gotten offers. I just turned them down because I didn't like the term. So it's like what you want to do is obviously know, okay, I'm not desperate for money where I have to agree to terrible terms, because that'll be you will have a way worse time doing that. I know founder stories, people.
And it just hurts your company too, right? If you
Totally.
get in the bed with the wrong money, the wrong terms, the wrong
Mhm.
partners, your vision can go off the rails as well.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And so I would just recommend to do that. And more importantly, like I said, the validation of your idea can only happen through the market, and it can only happen through your own creativity and ingenuity to do it. If you spend most of your time trying to get investors to validate your idea through their checks and through their work with you, you're going to lose. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I cannot tell you how many times people were excited about, getting an investment from whatever firm, coming out the other end and saying, honestly, that was not even really helpful. And at some point it was hurting what we were doing. And that doesn't mean don't work with venture. There are some fantastic folks in venture. I have friends who are in that space, and they're wonderful people, right? But at the end of the day, you have to think they have a fiduciary responsibility to their limited partners as much as you have a fiduciary responsibility to the people who believed in your company, which includes your employees, which includes, your fans, friends, and family if you built around that. And so you just need to be mindful of that before, and really you should really do it for yourself too, because if you're sitting there trying to get everybody to validate your idea, that just means you don't believe in you.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's this notion, and I think either Paul Graham or someone that I read recently mentioned it around the investors that you feel like you match with best are the ones that you don't really need. So, you feel confident that even without these investors, this particular amount of funding, you'll still succeed, but they'll just help you get there maybe a little bit faster, or they see, directly into what your vision are and they resonate with that, things of that nature. But in order to get there, a lot of times you say you had to prove it, right? And I think there's something really important to get into maybe quickly around finding your first customers. So what would be kind of your tips on finding your first customers? Because it's obviously not always black and white, 0 to 1 binary situation to find those people.
Well, if you took some of the recommendations of initially going out there and trying to network and, casting as wide of a net, which I like to call kind of increasing the surface area of your luck, you will have made relationships that you might have been able to keep going, where you can ask people if you know people in certain fields, where you can see if, like, hey, do you happen to know somebody who works in this realm? Like, I do that even today, and I've been doing that since forever. Right. And so, obviously tapping into the folks that you know first is always good. And I always like to ask if people know people, right? And, it's through that credibility I can at least get my first feedback moments. And then some people will be very excited about what you're working on, where they'll ask to be on a waiting list. They'll ask to be kept up to date so that they can purchase the product down the road. It's typical customer discovery. And the fact of the matter is, though, when you do the search for your team, you can simultaneously do this for the search of how easily can I reach out to a market. And then once you work with those people the first time, you ask them where their best news resources are. You ask them where their best, what do you look at before you purchase? What do you do before you do this? What is your process? And so that can really illuminate a lot. And then you can build process and strategy around it. So in fact, actually, that whole building up your network strat is kind of like a 2-in-1.
All
I'm an
right.
efficient person, so.
No, I love this. So we have arrived to the end of our recording time. So Mike, John and I want to know, do you have 2 minutes for us to do a quick rapid fire 5 question round?
Yep, exactly 2 minutes. So
All right. Okay. So John, let's just popcorn these questions.
Beautiful.
All right. I will kick us off. Describe your fundraising journey in one word.
annoying.
Love it.
Who was your first customer?
A guy in Australia.
Okay. Um, which investor quality really stands out to you?
Roll your sleeves up, but also know how to get out of the way.
What's the best advice you've gotten from an advisor?
That's a really good question, actually. If you don't enjoy the journey, and if you don't enjoy the journey and take the moment to like have a moment to kind of just like center yourself and like take a moment to just see like where you were at and appreciate that, you'll really hate the end, because you'll feel like you missed all those really awesome parts of reflection. It's more around the idea that you should center yourself around where you are, and understand that everything is those really nice milestones, and you should appreciate that, and you should celebrate that. And then it's like someone winning the Super Bowl and then going in and literally getting back to work. I'm that type of person. I might celebrate for maybe an hour and then I'm back to work. But when I reach my final goal, there may be a possibility that I hadn't slowed down enough to really appreciate. And I think people should appreciate more.
Love it. So that concludes our rapid fire as well as our podcast session with Mike Liu, the CEO and co-founder of FreeFuse. Thank you so much for coming on board with us today, Mike. We had a blast chatting with you. And is there anything else you wanted to let us know or let our audience?
If you want to connect with me, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'll chat with anybody, and, happy to, spend, a quick 10, 15 minutes with anybody. And obviously you might have, might have alluded to it, but if you do have something unique, we build an ecosystem of partners. And if there's a way that we can build a win-win, I'm all for it.
Awesome.
We'll definitely share that down in the description and notes below.
All right. Well, I appreciate you all for inviting me on, and looking forward to seeing what opportunities this builds for other people. Happy to be on again if that's ever going to be of help to your audience.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate it.